Hello, everyone. This is Gerald Celente, and we're very, very honored today to have with us Mr. Scott Ritter. Back in the day, I remember Scott Ritter, and he was a man that spoke out against the Iraq War and what was going on like just about no one. And how I admired so much his bravery, his knowledge, and his care of what he did and how hard he tried to stop a war based on lies launched by George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, and a whole bunch of criminal gang that so many people knew that were lies about Saddam Hussein having weapons of mass destruction and ties to Al-Qaeda. So thank you so much, Mr. Ritter, for being here today. And please give the people a little bit of background about yourself and your knowledge of the system.
The system. Well, I guess I was born into the system. My father was a career Air Force officer, and I was raised around the world as an Air Force brat. I went to high school in Hawaii, Turkey, and Germany. The importance of the last two is the reason why we were in Turkey and Germany was because of the Cold War. And both Turkey and Germany were outposts of the United States in the front lines against the Soviet Union in the Cold War. So I was very much a child of the Cold War. Growing up an Air Force brat with the Soviet threat being, broadcast every day, I decided to follow my father's footsteps. I went to college. Got a degree in Russian history, following under the precepts of Sun Tzu, The Art of War, Know Your Enemy as Yourself. So I would study the Russians, their culture, their literature, their history, their language, in preparation to go off to war and kill them. I joined the Marine Corps for the sole purpose of closing with and destroying the Soviet enemy through firepower and maneuver. And for 2.5 years, I worked in the deserts of 29 Palms, California, learning the trade of war, learning how to fight the Soviets. And as soon as I mastered my art, then Mikhail Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan go and sign the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty in December of 1987, which basically eliminated entire categories of nuclear weapons. And the Soviet Union went from being the enemy to being somebody that I would have to learn to cooperate with for disarmament. I was picked to be one of the first inspectors to go into the Soviet Union and implement the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. And I spent 2 years working outside of a Soviet missile factory in Votkinsk. Wow. And it was an eye-opening experience. So one of the other things that happened is the INF Treaty, for the first time, incorporated on-site inspection as a verification means of determining whether or not somebody is in compliance with the treaty. It had never been done before, so I was among the inspectors that literally wrote the book on on-site inspection. And when my time with the on-site inspection agency ended in July of 1990, I went back to the Marine Corps right in time for Saddam Hussein to invade Kuwait. And I became caught up in the war, as did many, and ended up being assigned to General Norman Schwarzkopf's staff as an intelligence officer in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. And because of my experience in the Soviet Union with missiles, I was given the Scud portfolio. So one of my jobs was to work with the U.S. Air Force and coalition special forces to hunt down and interdict Iraqi Scud missiles before they could be launched against either Israel or the Gulf Arab states. I finished with what they call a good war, and what that means is I lived, and I came out with a good reputation of a man who could do his job. But when I left, when the war ended, I went back to the Marine Corps, and I was struggling with what my purpose as a Marine was anymore. Because I wasn't joking when I talked about being a child of the Cold War and joining the Marine Corps to kill Russians. Literally, that's what the Cold War was about, being prepared to stand up to the Soviet threat. And yet now I just spent the last 2 years being friends with the Russians, and the Cold War was over. There was no need for me to continue down this path. There was really, in the intelligence business, in the Cold War, the ultimate jobs were either with what was called the military liaison mission, operating out of Potsdam, East Germany, outside of Berlin, to spy on the Soviet group of forces in Germany. It was a very elite job, and that's what I wanted to do. I also wanted to be a defense attaché in Moscow, who would travel around Russia, sneaking away from the KGB to get close to targets of intelligence value, so I could take photographs and stuff like that.
Wow.
We weren't doing that anymore. So I was left saying, well, what is the purpose? I just fought my war. I served my country. Maybe it's time for me to get out of the Marine Corps and pursue a different life. So I actually left the Marine Corps with an eye on working in the former Soviet Union as the country manager for H.J. Heinz food processing company. You might know them as the tomato people. And I was going to help install and manage food processing plants in southern Russia. I thought it was going to be a fascinating job. But in August of 1991, there was a coup that overthrew Gorbachev, and Yeltsin became famous for jumping on a tank. Coup was overthrown. But because of the unrest and the turmoil and the uncertainty, H.J. Heinz withdrew from the Soviet project, and I was unemployed. And at the moment of my greatest concern about being unemployed, I got a phone call from a colonel I used to work for in Russia. He was now the chief of staff for the United Nations Special Commission in Iraq, which was tasked with performing on-site inspections in Iraq to oversee the disarmament of Iraqi weapons of mass destruction. Originally, they built the inspection process along the lines of the INF Treaty, on the notion that the Iraqis would provide a declaration that listed the totality of their WMD, and then the inspectors would go in a very gentlemanly fashion to confirm the declaration was complete, and then to oversee the accounting or the dismemberment, the disarming, dismantlement of these weapons of mass destruction. That's how the INF Treaty worked, with the United States and the Soviets providing declarations, et cetera. Well, the Iraqis lied. They failed to declare entire programs. They failed to declare a biological weapons program. They failed to declare a nuclear weapons program. They underdeclared their chemical weapons capability. They underdeclared their ballistic missile capability. And so now these inspectors had to come up with a new way of doing business. And it was be intelligence driven, because if the Iraqis are hiding capability, then we have to find it. The Iraqis aren't going to give it to us. We have to search it out. So I was brought in to create an intelligence unit within the United Nations that would receive information from other nations, organize inspections, and then go off into Iraq and searching for this hidden capability. And for 7 years, I did that job. And I went into Iraq more than 40 times. 14 of them as a chief weapons inspector, meaning I was in charge of the team. I was the lead liaison for foreign intelligence. I worked with the CIA, British MI6, Israeli intelligence, German intelligence, Jordanian intelligence, and we did the job. I mean, it was a very difficult job. We were confronted the whole time with the fact that the United States did not want us to succeed. They were looking at the inspection process as a means of undermining Saddam Hussein, as opposed to actually disarming Iraq. Because see, if you disarmed Iraq, sanctions would be lifted. If sanctions were lifted, then Saddam could get back to the business of being Saddam. The U.S. wanted to keep sanctions in place, which meant that the more I tried to succeed at my job, the more I became a threat to the United States.
Wow.
And so in August of 1998, I resigned my position as with the United Nations Special Commission, and I started speaking out against U.S. policy. And since that time, I guess I've gained a reputation for being a contrarian when it comes to U.S. policy in the Middle East and U.S. arms control policy, et cetera. Not because I hate my country. I love my country. I joined the Marine Corps and I was willing to die for my country. And I've served my country honorably. But, a citizen's job isn't to sit back and let the government do anything they want to. The citizen's job is to empower themselves with knowledge and information and hold their government to account if they're deviating from the norms and values that we claim to embrace as a people. So I'm pretty proud of the fact that I've been speaking out. Now, on the issue of Ukraine, as I mentioned, I used to train to fight the Soviets. And Soviet doctrine is similar to Russian doctrine today. I'm a student of Russian military history. I've worked in the Soviet Union, and I have contacts in the past and continued contacts with the Soviet military, et cetera. So I'm very familiar with Russian doctrine, the Russian military, and things of that nature. So when this conflict started, I felt that I was in a position to accurately assess what was actually going on in the ground in the face of what was an overwhelming amount of politicized information coming from the mainstream media that seeks to tell the narrative from a Ukrainian perspective in a manner that doesn't necessarily reflect the actuality of what's taking place. So I've been speaking out lately about what I believe could be happening on the ground. I need to make it clear that while a lot of people talk about the Russian playbook, I don't have it, so I can't tell you what's in the Russian playbook. I don't think anybody has it. They haven't published a playbook. And when people talk about the intent of Vladimir Putin, I don't have a phone that I can pick up and call Vladimir Putin and ask him what his intent is. And I don't think any of the people who speak of Putin's intent have that either. So there's a lot of people out there proclaiming that they have special insight into the thinking of the Russian leader and into the plans of the Russian military leadership. They don't. I don't either. What I do have is a history of experience about the Russian military that allows me to look at a map to assess information and determine whether or not that is consistent with what I understand the facts to be, or if it deviates to such an extent that maybe we have to question whether or not this information is accurate.
So what do you see going on?
Well, what I see going on right now is a Russian response that is decades in the making. There's a lot of people that say that what Putin has done in Ukraine is a very impetuous, rash act, that it's a gamble, that Putin is gambled. And this creates the notion of a leader who is a risk taker, who's not certain of where he stands, who is confronted with a problem and is seeking to take a shortcut to a solution. No, this is a problem that has been in the making since 1997, when NATO began its process of expanding, allowing former Warsaw Pact nations into the NATO alliance and gradually moving towards the border with Russia. This is a problem that has been ongoing since 1999, when Boris Yeltsin stepped aside and brought in Vladimir Putin as the president of Russia. Boris Yeltsin, of course, ran Russia during the decades of the 90s in the aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union, who allowed the United States and other countries to run roughshod over Russian sovereignty, to view Russia as an economic opportunity for carpetbaggers to come in and rob Russia blind, who empowered a class of oligarchs who stole Russia's wealth and made it their own. And the United States was all too happy with Yeltsin. And when Yeltsin stepped aside and brought in Vladimir Putin said, we're no longer playing that game. Russia's a sovereign state. We're going to assert our sovereign control over our own economy, et cetera. People in the West started viewing him as a threat to the Western-based hegemony that had been established over Russia. So, this is a problem that when you combine NATO expansion with a leader that's now viewed as a threat, NATO expansion is no longer simply about bringing a security framework over Eastern Europe to prevent Eastern Europe from becoming like Yugoslavia. That was the original thinking behind the expansion of NATO. We must secure Eastern Europe to prevent Europe from confronting a series of Yugoslavia-type breakups and conflicts. But then as the expansion went over, you have Putin being perceived as a threat. So now Russia is a threat, and that threat is magnified in the eyes of the former Soviet satellite states like Poland and the Baltics, who have no love lost for Russia, so they magnify the notion of a Russian threat. And from a Russian perspective, they're now looking at an expanding NATO coming up to their borders that represents a direct threat to Russia.
Right.
And Russia had been speaking out about this. In 2007, Vladimir Putin gave what I consider to be one of the greatest political speeches in modern history. And that is address before the Munich Security Council, where he was supposed to be brought in as an act of surrender. The West expected him to bow down before his Western masters, to kiss the ring of his overlords, and to start playing the game of becoming assimilated into the West. Instead, Putin stood there in front of an audience of Western power brokers, and he chastised them. He chastised them about being acolytes of the United States. He chastised the United States about seeking to impose a singularity on the world. He chastised Europe and the United States about what had been done in Iraq after the 2003 invasion and occupation. Do you not know what you have done? He told them about Iraq. You've destroyed a nation. You have lied. You have destroyed the international legal framework. And then he said, the day of the unilateral polarity is over. The world will now move to a multipolar situation that Russia will be one of equals. The world will include many different powers, including Russia and the United States, but others as well. His speech was not well received. And instead of listening to him, the United States and NATO doubled down in 2008. The Bucharest Security Summit for NATO formally invited Ukraine and Georgia to be members of NATO. How did Russia view this? We know, because not only do we have the statements of Putin and others, William Burns, who was the U.S. ambassador to Russia, wrote a memorandum that was sent out in February of 2009, the title of which is "Niet means niet," no means no. And what he was saying is that when the Russians say that the expansion of NATO into Ukraine is a red line, they mean it's a red line. They're not joking. They're not bluffing. And then he set out two things. He said, one, the Russian concerns are real, are genuine, meaning that the West should not just dismiss these concerns as, Russian, pouting. No, this is a real concern. The consequences, and this is a very important part of his memorandum, the consequences of ignoring Russia will mean that in the future, Russia will have no choice but to militarily intervene, which will result in the destruction of Ukraine, the loss of Crimea, and the loss of Donbass. This was written in 2009, pre-2014. And already, the U.S. Ambassador, William Burns, knows that if NATO keeps expanding, the outcome will be a Ukraine that is destroyed and which no longer includes Crimea and the Donbass. So the West can't claim, as Michael McFaul, who was later the U.S. ambassador under Barack Obama, he has repeatedly said that when he was with the National Security Council and when he was ambassador, he never heard about Russia's concerns about NATO, implying that Russia's just making this up. Well, he was in the National Security Council in February of 2009 when Burns's memorandum was written. So McFaul is either the worst informed national security expert on Russia, or he's a liar. Because Burns's memorandum was there, everybody was talking about it, everybody knew that this was a concern for NATO, but the West ignored it and continued to pursue. Then after 2014, when the United States worked to overthrow the pro-Western president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, through the Maidan Revolution, Russia became doubly concerned because now overnight, Ukraine went from being a problematic but friendly border country to a hyper-nationalistic. And when I say nationalistic, I mean the nationalism of Stepan Bandera, a former Nazi supporter whose forces not only slaughtered Jews during World War II, but also slaughtered Poles and Russians in the decade after the Second World War during a 10-year-long insurgency. It cost over 300,000 civilian lives, around 36,000 Russian security lives. This force had been under the ground, but now through the Maidan Revolution, we had brought them into the mainstream. We had weaponized them. Weaponized Nazi ideology is what we're talking about here. And Russia said, this is a threat. And that began a threat to Russia because they were basically seeking to purge Russian culture, Russian language from Ukraine, which they wanted to be a pure Ukrainian state. So Russia took the Crimea to protect the Russian majority population there, and Russia supported Russian separatists in the Donbass to protect them from the Ukrainians. This began an 8-year war, and there was an international agreement done through what's called the Normandy format. That is Germany, France, with Russia in observation, and Ukraine, negotiated a settlement which would have brought an end to the conflict in the Donbass, recognized the Donbass to be part of Ukraine, but that the Russians would be subjected to a special autonomous status that was separate from the constitutional language that made Ukraine first language, et cetera, Ukrainian. The Russian presidents, Poroshenko and then Zelensky, refused to sign it, not because it was a bad deal, but because if they signed it, the neo-Nazis that were now empowered have said they will kill them. So we have a situation where the Russian government, the Ukrainian government, Ukrainian policy is being dictated by neo-Nazi ideology. And if you know anything about the former Soviet Union, about Russia, you know that they don't take the issue of Nazi ideology lightly. 23 million to 32 million Soviet citizens lost their lives in a conflict with Nazi Germany.
Yep.
And in every town, every village, every city, there are memorials to the sacrifice of the Russian people in that war. And every year they celebrate on May 9th, Victory Day, which is a day of celebration of the army that's liberated them from the Nazis, liberated Europe from the Nazis. And so now to have this Nazi ideology be mainstreamed in Ukraine, people say, well, what? They're a minority. Yeah, politically, if they ran for office, it's a minority. But a minority isn't a minority if they can use the threat of violence to coerce the parliament to vote with a strong majority to make Stepan Bandera the national hero of Ukraine, to mainstream his ideology. So it's not a minority. They've become an influencing majority, so to speak, because if they disagree with something, nothing happens. Russia viewed this as a threat. And so Russian military action that we saw transpire on February 24th was simply William Burns' warning coming to fruition. Russia tried everything to create a diplomatic off-ramp. They reached out to NATO over and over and over again, to the United States, and they said, don't ignore us. Work with us. We can compromise. But if you ignore us, we will have no choice but to embrace the military technical response, which is this operation. So what we see right now is a military operation that has two primary military objectives. The first is denazification, the destruction of the nationalist military units that had incorporated personnel that embrace neo-Nazi ideology, and the destruction of the political parties that breathe life into this, that mainstream this. That's one goal. The other goal is the demilitarization of the Ukrainian military. What this means is that from 2015 on, the Ukrainian military had been trained by NATO to be a de facto extension of NATO. So even though Ukraine wasn't a NATO member, its army was a de facto extension of NATO. Their battalion, 30 of their battalions were considered to be interoperable with NATO, meaning that you could plug out a German battalion from a German division, plug in the Ukrainian battalion, and it would function seamlessly. For the Russians, this was unacceptable. And so one of their objectives is to demilitarize. That means to deconstruct the NATO military infrastructure that exists in Ukraine today. And both these military objectives are designed to achieve two political objectives. One is the liberation of the Donbass, to make sure that Lugansk and Donetsk are under Russian-speaking sovereignty. Two is to achieve the neutrality, permanent neutrality of Ukraine, so that never again Russia can be threatened by Ukraine becoming a NATO state. This is the purpose of the military operation. It's a complex operation. The Ukrainian military is very professional, very well trained, led. They're putting up a heck of a fight. This is not easy. This is difficult, but the Russians are winning. And they're on the verge of, I think, winning a decisive victory that will achieve all of their political objectives in the not too distant future.
Well, you've answered all my questions. And you said something earlier. How you were trained in the military. You hated the Russians. You wanted to kill them, and you said when you went there, it was eye-opening.
Yeah.
So what was the eye-opening? What was your emotion?
Well, look, I consider myself to be a nice guy. And what I mean by that is if you and I meet on the street, unless you do something egregious to me or my family, I'm going to shake your hand. We'll have a conversation. We can sit down and have a beer. We're human beings.
Right.
We share the same desires in life. We want to be happy. We want to, have a roof over our head, food on the table, raise our family, education, entertainment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, if you and I went to war, it would be difficult for me to kill you because I like you. I view you as a fellow human being. So in order for me to actually go to war against you, I've got to learn to hate you. I've got to learn up front to hate you. I got to learn to view you as less than human. That's just the reality. And so when we dealt with the Russians, I respected them. I knew their culture. I read their literature. I read everything. But I bought into the evil empire notion. I bought into the Soviet Bolsheviks wanting to attack my family. There's the old Cold War sayings, kill a commie for mommy, or better dead than red. I believed in that 100%. That's why I was rushing to join the armed forces, because I viewed the Soviets as a threat worthy of my life, to give my life up in defense of my country against this threat. I wasn't ignorant of their culture, their language, who they were, but I had put it through a filter that hardened me to view them as the enemy, and therefore to be prepared and be willing to kill them if called upon to do so. Now I'm suddenly sent over there into the city of Vodkinsk, which is literally 750 miles east of Moscow in the foothills of the Ural Mountains, in an area that had been closed to foreigners since the revolution. So we're the first non-German prisoners of war, because some German POWs went there and helped build buildings, but we're the first non-German prisoners of war to come to Vodkinsk. 30 Americans who aren't there just temporary. We're building a permanent inspection facility outside of a Soviet missile factory that's producing missiles that are solely produced to hit the United States. In fact, when the first missiles came out, we would joke when we inspected, we'd name them. I think the first one we named Pittsburgh, the second one we named Des Moines, the third one we named Chicago, and then we were told to stop naming them because it was too close to the truth. I mean, it made people uncomfortable. But so it's serious business that we're doing that's related to the security of the United States. But this isn't about us coming in and imposing our will. This is a cooperative venture. This is us working with our Soviet counterparts to create an inspection process that they have agreed to. They're doing the same thing, by the way, in the United States outside of a U.S. missile factory in Magna, Utah, near Salt Lake City, with 30 people permanently living there, learning. And Americans are now being exposed to the inspectors at the Soviet inspectors going, hey, they're just like us. They're humans. They have a sense of humor. My God, they laugh. They have a wife. They have kids. They have animals. They have pets. They love music. They love to dance. They love to play guitar. They love to do everything we love to do. And that was it. I remember the local press, the Leninsky Put, the Way of Lenin, Communist Party newspaper. And in the old days, you'd sit there and go, Communist Party newspaper. Oh, yeah. These are bad people. Well, the editor was a female named Elvira Bukina, I think. And she came along with her staff to interview the inspectors. And she's just sitting there. I mean, she's literally, her eyes are wide and her jaw is dropping. And she's just like, you're humans. we were led to believe that you guys were like bad. And then they talked to us and they realized that we had all the foibles of humans, meaning, we had some Democrats, we had some Republicans. This was in 1988. So we've got a presidential election coming up, where, And they're like, well, you guys are friends, but you're a Republican, you're a Democrat. How can you be friends? Because politics doesn't define who we are. We go shopping. There was a Dom Moda, the house of fashion. And I'd go there and pick out cloth and talk to bring the measurements of my wife and try and get them to make a dress for my wife. And so they'd have to bring in a Soviet girl, a woman, and they'd say, is she the same form as your wife? And I'm like, this is embarrassing, but she's the closest one. So they'd measure the dress off of her
Wow.
to build it. And it's just this sort of thing where we're walking around the town, running into the kids, we're playing soccer with the kids, teaching them to play softball. We're playing basketball against the city champions. We're having comedy contests with the Young Communist League. It was just a transformative moment. And Soviet society was transforming at the time, too. You had perestroika and glasnost, two Gorbachev-linked policies taking place at the same time that the inspections were in. So we were in Soviet society at a time of great transformation, which meant that we would be talking to them about these major changes in their life. They're in deeply personal issues like, what is my economic future going to be like? How am I going to feed my family? How am I going to? And so they stopped being the enemy and they started being humans that you cared about. You truly cared about them. You wanted good things for them. You wanted their life to go well. You became friends with them, even though we weren't supposed to become friends. And so it was just an absolute eye-opener. It's one that got replayed with Iraq because I went to war against Iraq. And I mean, I wasn't a frontline combatant, but I would do things such as gather intelligence and then turn that into a target that would be struck that would kill Iraqis. And some of these targets were of the nature that there was more than a likelihood that Iraqi civilians were being killed. That means families, women and children. But it was a military target with military necessity, and the force deemed was proportional. Now, if you're somebody like me who's married, who wanted to have kids at the time, et cetera, you would go insane, literally insane, if you viewed your work from the perspective that these Iraqis are human beings. You would go insane. So you have to turn them into the enemy. You have to harden yourself and say, no, these are evil people doing evil deeds and they must be brought to heel. And that way you can look at a target that people are in, the 2,000-pound bomb is going to hit, and people are going to die, and you're not going to commit suicide. Wow. So you become hard. And then all of a sudden the war's over, and a few months later, I'm sent back to Iraq to inspect. And I get off the airplane, and there's the enemy. Except, damn it, they're nice people. They have senses of humor. They care about their families. They love their families. They love their country. They laugh. They cry. They weep. I mean, the whole thing. And you just realize at that point in time just how stupid war is, how utterly wasteful and stupid war is. Because the people that you're trying to kill one day are literally, if you look in the mirror, they're you. They just happen to live in another part of the world under maybe a different political system, but they're not inherently evil. They're not bad people. And it hardened me to, again, I'm not a pacifist by any means. If you come after my family, I can go into hard and kill mode that quick. It's easy, but I don't want to. What I want to do is peacefully coexist with the world. What I want to do is ensure that if there's a problem, that we exhaust every means short of war, find a solution before we talk about going to war. That the last option is the option that sheds American blood and sheds Iraqi blood or sheds Russian blood. And that should never be the first option. And that's sort of been my purpose, I guess, ever since leaving the inspection business back in 1998, has been to speak out in critical fashion of American policies, which I believe too easily take the path to conflict and don't spend enough time trying to search for a diplomatic off-ramp.
I mean, you know about a guy by the name of Dwight D. Eisenhower,
Yeah.
5-star general, Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces, who in his farewell address warns the American people that the military-industrial complex is robbing the nation of the genius of the scientists, the sweat of the laborers, and the future of the children.
And it would also change the nation.
Yep.
That what the United States thought it was would no longer be.
Yep.
When you allow the confluence between the military-industrial complex and Congress to come in, because now you've perverted American democracy with money and greed that's linked to war. So yeah, no, Dwight D. Eisenhower was a genius. And the other thing about Dwight, remember this: he was the commander of American forces during the war, during the Normandy invasion. And when he gave a speech about the sacrifice made years later, he wept. He wept. So here's a man who, had been a hardened killer, and yet in retrospect, he wept about sacrifices.
Yeah.
Because he recognized that war is, it's, a lot of people keep saying that war is mankind's finest moment. Because during conflict, human beings do amazing things of heroism, amazing acts, science, and all that stuff. But to me, war represents the absolute failure of humanity, the failure of mankind. So, and I think Dwight Eisenhower grew to recognize that war was not something to be embraced or encouraged or spoken highly of. When war occurs, it means that humanity has failed. And I say that about what's going on in Ukraine right now. Even though I believe Russia has a valid national security interest in doing what it's doing, I would tell Vladimir Putin the same thing I would tell Zelensky. This is both of your faults, because there were things that could have happened to prevent
I agree
this.
with you. I agree
Everything
with you.
that's happening, every life lost, every building destroyed, everything didn't have to happen. There was a way out of this. The sad thing is, what is ultimately probably going to happen in terms of the terms of surrender that are going to be imposed on Ukraine, Ukraine could have gotten away with half of that simply up front by saying, yeah, we won't join NATO, and we'll work on delegitimizing these Nazis, and we won't threaten Russians. And all NATO had to say is, we accept this outcome. Look what happened. Peace.
Yeah.
But no, we chose the path of war because, unfortunately, the military-industrial complex, when linked with politicians, makes war an imperative.
In Putin's speech this week, by the way, he came out against, quote, the military-industrial complex, and that's igniting this. And you mentioned about how the lead up to this happened and how I don't know your exact words, but the allegiance and alliance of some sort between NATO and Ukraine forces. The United States and NATO, it's in this week's Trends Journal magazine, $40 billion since the overthrow of Yanukovych has gone to Ukraine.
Yeah.
And this is our magazine from 2014 about the overthrow, the coup of the United States. So we've been following this as well, And now, to me, someone like you should be running for office in a new party, or because the world is ready for a man that knows the real sides of the story. And you wouldn't be you if you weren't where you were. And I understand that because I'm me, because I was on the other side at one time without going into my life. And I wouldn't know what I know if I wasn't on the other side. I was killing environmental legislation at the height of the environmental movement back in the 70s. At 28 years old, staying at the Willard Hotel and putting my meetings on at the Hay Adams. And you mentioned about the Marines and in the first Gulf War. I met Anthony Zinni, the general as well, And so anyway, I was on another side. And you were on the other side. You grew up in it. And as we grow up, we learn things. You don't know anything when you're a kid. You just buy it and learn it. But a man like you, And what you have in your knowledge and your passion and your care, you know, you need to be out there and really leading the charge of freedom and peace. And I don't know, you know, I'm just coming off the top of my head and saying this, but you know, you're an essential being to bring this country back into the direction where it needs to go.
Well, I certainly appreciate the kind words and the no. I will say this. I mean, everybody's seen the movie Mr. Smith Goes to Washington with Jimmy Stewart. And it's a great movie. And I'm not saying that I'm Mr. Smith. What I'm saying, though, is that Washington, D.C., I've been there. I've seen it. I'm sure you've done the same. You can joust at windmills all you want, but unless there's a fundamental change in how the system works, it would be, I'll put it this way, and I'm just being deadly honest with you. When I made the decision to step away from the system, from doing the job as an insider and to be a critic, I paid a heavy price and my family paid a heavy price. Now, I don't care about the price I paid. I'm an adult, to bring it on. But what happened to my family and what it continues to happen to my family, because there's ongoing ramifications, knowing what I know today, I wouldn't have done it because it's not fair to my wife. It wasn't fair to my children. It wasn't fair to my immediate family. It wasn't fair to my friends to step out and try to do the right thing only to be beaten down. And again, if you want to beat me down,
Come
have
on
at it,
in.
man.
Yep.
Yeah, but
Yep.
my family was asked to pay a price that they didn't get to vote on. They didn't get to say, yeah, we want you to do this. They've always been by my side. They've supported me, but there's just, no other way of saying it, that the sacrifice they were compelled to make is a sacrifice that no family should be asked to make. And they've made it. And so, I would never again step into that ring because I've done it.
Yep.
And my family and I can't do that to my family anymore. Now that seems a little, if you want to call me a coward, you can call me a coward.
No,
It's
I
just,
understand.
I'm at the stage of my life where it's time for me to stop being selfish about what I believe in, even though I continue to talk out about this. I'm not afraid, but to become an active player, no, it's time for me to instead turn to my family and say, how can I help you? How can I take care of you?
That's great.
How can I promote your stuff? And, the lesson to be learned from this is maybe there's no hope for America. And what I mean by that is we might be so fundamentally broken that this system as it exists may not be worth preserving, because if you can't get the finest, and I'm not saying me, I'm saying the finest people in America, the best and the brightest, who want to get involved in making America better. And instead, when they do get involved, they get eaten up by a system that isn't designed to do the right thing. It's built to do the wrong thing. And in order to survive in the system, you have to make so many compromises that you become that which you originally wanted to transform. Yeah. How many people want to do that voluntarily? So most people who would be great people in terms of transformative government turn their backs on it, rightfully so, because it is a poison, broken cesspool that doesn't offer any viable off-ramp into decency. I mean, that's my very jaundiced assessment of America today.
I agree with you. All you had to do was watch the Oscars. Right? By the way, although I'm a little old guy, I used to teach close combat for many years.
Okay, yeah.
And so I hear everything you're saying. We meet on the street, we're nice, have a nice time. If you try to take me out, I'll kill you, just to make it clear.
The switch, the on-off switch.
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
The thing I'm learning is
Yeah.
I have a lot of people attack me now. And again, it's like water off a duck's back. But my whole thing is, look, you want to attack me, 3 rounds in the ring, man. That's all I ask. 3 rounds in the ring. If and then you view me as a bad guy, you got 3 rounds to beat me up.
Yeah.
But I
Well,
got 3 rounds to beat you up too. But now what my wife is reminding me is I've passed the age of 60. It's like, shut up, because you can't go 3 rounds anymore.
well, with me, it's, as a little guy, I can't go 3 rounds. I have to go a split second.
You got to win that quick.
That's
Yeah.
it. That's the end of it.
No, in close combat, that's what it was. We had we're supposed to take down a sentry in less than 4 seconds.
Yep. Yeah.
No
Yeah.
hand-to-hand conflict was supposed to last more than 30 seconds, or else you exhaust yourself.
Yeah. Well, again, I'm not going to punch out a guy like you.
No, you got to do other things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyways, but enough violence. Like I said, I used to live it. You lived it.
Yeah.
We know what it is, and we understand the necessity of it in the face of evil. But the world's solution isn't to train a bunch of close combat specialists.
No.
The world's solution is to train a bunch of people who reject violence as a solution.
And that's it. And so, I'm trying to start a new party, a new movement. And, I'm thinking of who the people that could be the voices and the power of it. You've done so much. Again, you changed my life. And by the way, I paid for it too. I had best-selling books, this Trends 2000, Trend Tracking, Trends 2000. And, in my magazine, I used to be on Oprah, The Today Show, Good Morning. I used to be on everybody. And I got blackballed when I said, it began when I said what would happen with the Afghan war. I had the nerve to say, if Alexander the Great couldn't pull it off, if the British at the height of Into the Valley of Death, Road to 600 couldn't pull it off, if the Russians couldn't win, what makes you think we're going to win this? Why, you're anti-American.
Yeah,
And then with the
20 years
Iraq
later,
war,
boom.
I listened to you and learned a lot about it and started speaking out against it and writing about it. And I got blackballed from everybody.
Yeah.
So when you say about talking the price, I almost lost my building in 2007. I was one day away from foreclosure. So I went down really hard and big. I used to be on CNN like 4 times a month back in the day, and the Today Show and all of this stuff. I got totally blackballed for speaking out, and it's your fault because I learned from you.
I apologize. I'll take full responsibility.
Thank you so much. And any ideas that you have, and I wrote down so many of the things that you said that are so powerful. When I asked you about the Washington system, you said it's a poisoned, broken cesspool.
It is, though. It is.
It is.
And everybody who goes in comes out a changed person. I'll give you a little war story if you got a 2 seconds.
Yep, go on.
At the height of my thing, when I resigned, as a weapons inspector back in 1998, I testified for the Senate. Joe Biden came after me famously, calling me Scotty Boy and saying that it was above my pay grade and all this stuff, what I was doing. And there was a backlash in the Republican Party, and I was a Ronald Reagan Republican. The Republican Party embraced me heartily. And the Jack Kemp, a former quarterback of the Buffalo Bills, who was the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development under Reagan, and became sort of a Republican Party establishment guy, called me up and he said, "Hey, we're hosting a little function here. I want you to come meet some people." I said, "What for?" And he said, "Well, we're sort of the congressional. We pick the future direction of the Republican presence in Congress. And we think you'd be a good guy to run for Congress."
Wow.
And I said, "But I don't do politics." He said, "We'll just come to the thing. Let us talk." So I came, and there was people there ready to write checks to make me a U.S. Congressman.
Wow.
All I had to do, say yes. Because I said, "Well, who am I going to take?" I said, because the guy who's in our district, he's a Republican, so I'm not going to. They said, no, we'll pick a district for you. We'll pick a district where you can win. I said, "Well, how can I do that? I don't know the people. I don't know the district. I don't know the town. How can I be the representative?" Don't worry about it. You're a good guy. We have faith in you. You're our kind of guy. I was sitting there looking at all these people smiling, and I said what I probably shouldn't have if I ever wanted to be a congressman. I said, how do you know I'm a good guy? We know. I said, okay, ask me 2 questions. They said, what? I said, ask me my opinion on abortion and my opinion on gun control. Because those are the 2 hot topic Republican issues. They said, well, what's your opinion on abortion? I said, look, I'm a father of twin daughters. I couldn't imagine a scenario that didn't have them in this world. I couldn't imagine allowing them to have their life extinguished before they had a chance to be born. I said, so I would do anything once that life was created to keep it and bring it and all that stuff. They're all like smiling. This is our guy. This is our guy. I said, but you know what? Not my decision. Not my decision. I'm a guy. The decision is the woman bearing the children. She gets the ultimate call. I would do everything to talk her out of it, but it's her body, her rights, her decision. So, and then they said, gun control. I said, I love guns. I own a couple. Got them for home defense. I'm an expert shot, qualified expert rifle and pistol in the Marine Corps. I used to like to hunt. I gave it up after the war, but I respect hunters. I respect gun owners. And I think the Second Amendment clearly gives me a right for gun ownership. But I said, but it also incurs a right of the state has the right to protect itself from gun owners, meaning that my gun should be registered. And before I can own a gun, I should be certified as someone capable of using the gun, trained in the gun, trained in gun safety, that you just can't grant this life and death ability willy-nilly. So I believe that, while Americans should have a right to own arms, I think that there has to be a process involved of confirming how to use weapons, and that those weapons are duly registered with the state in case you ever abuse those weapons. Mom, they walked away. Kip was looking at me going, I respect you. I respect your integrity. But he said, you just literally, you threw away a golden opportunity. You could have been a U.S. congressman. And I said, I couldn't have, because I'm not willing to be anything other than who I am.
You got it.
And that's the thing. And plus, as I told my wife later, I said, I can't imagine what would have happened to me if I had gone to Congress.
Oh.
I mean, I'd either been a one-term congressman, or I would have had to make so many compromises.
That's right.
I'm not. Then right now, you can say whatever you want about me. I'm not perfect. I've made lots of mistakes in my life.
Yeah.
And but I can guarantee you this: when I wake up in the morning and look in the mirror, I'm pretty damn happy about what's looking back. I'm satisfied with this person. I think this person's a good person. I think this person's done everything that he could do to be a good person. If I had become a congressman, I don't think I'd be able to stare back at the person that was staring at me. And I don't know half the people. I don't know how the people who are currently in Congress can do that, with the compromises they make, the lies they tell, the portrayals that are out there, what they've done to the American people in the name of serving the American people. I wouldn't want to be one of them.
Well, I don't call it a political party. I call it a crime syndicate.
Yeah, it is.
It is.
It is.
They're murderers and thieves.
Yeah.
What you just said, the critical care nurses say that the greatest regret that people who are dying is that they weren't themselves and didn't do what they wanted to do in their lives. And to me, hell is taking that last breath and knowing you weren't the person you said you were or could have been.
Yeah.
So, you're not going to hell on that one. So thank you so much.
I might go to hell on a couple things, but not on that one. Yeah.
Oh, look, I got my, stuff too, man. Yeah, I love these people who had perfect lives all their lives and never did anything wrong.
I'd like to meet them. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
I so greatly appreciate it, and I wish you all the best, and thank you for doing this.
Thank you. Have a great day.